When the deputies arrived, they found Karen Kane, Jeremy's mother, at home. She was told the search was regarding the now-found Clark Calhoun. "What do you mean found?" Karen asked, her face draining of color. The detectives didn't mince words. Clark had been murdered, shot twice. Karen was visibly shaken. "That's impossible. My husband told me he moved to California." California. Elkins and Gladstone exchanged a look. Why would her husband, Joel, lie to his wife that their missing neighbor, whom their son had last seen, had simply relocated to California? It was a flimsy, immediate deflection. As the deputies began to execute the warrant, searching Jeremy's known address, the house was suddenly shattered by sound. They heard Karen, frantic and betrayed, on the phone. "Your buddies from Thurston County are here. They're tearing the house apart." Seconds later, a truck came skidding onto the gravel driveway. Joel Leninger, Jeremy's father, the co-owner, came barreling out, a man possessed by a blind, explosive rage. "Hands off my property!" he screamed, his face mottled. "What the hell is going on here? Get your asses off my land! You got no right!" The sheer violence of his reaction was stunning. Most people, faced with a police search warrant, would be angry, but contained. Joel was uncontrolled. Elkins observed the threat pattern in his eyes, the absolute terror masked by fury. "What are you afraid we're going to find in this house, Joel?" A deputy moved to detain him for obstruction. The struggle was immediate and brutal. It took 5 deputies to control Joel Leninger, a man fighting with the panicked strength of someone whose secret had been exposed to the light. He was screaming, swearing, and eventually cuffed and dragged into a patrol car, arrested for obstruction of justice and resisting arrest. The chaos outside allowed the search inside to proceed with renewed focus. Joel's reaction was not the sign of a cooperative citizen, but a man protecting a terrible secret. "Detective, check this out." A deputy called from the back bedroom, Jeremy's room. The deputies found an empty holster tucked away in a drawer. Next to it was a full magazine of .45 caliber ammunition. The evidence was circumstantial, but electrifying. The ammunition matched the caliber of the bullet recovered from Clark Calhoun's body. The murder weapon was gone, but its shadow, the holster, and the rounds was staring them in the face. They immediately asked Karen, who was now weeping quietly in the kitchen, "Whose room is this, ma'am?" They expected her to say Jeremy's. "Joel's," she whispered. "That's Joel's room." The eyebrow raised on Elkins's face felt heavy enough to pull his head down. Joel Leninger, the man who was currently screaming from the back of a police car. The father. Was it possible that the small, petty feud between Jeremy and Clark had somehow escalated to involve the owner of the ranch, protecting his son's pride and his property? Joel was now the primary suspect. He was brought into the sheriff's department, where he gradually calmed down from his arrest high. He was still indignant, dismissive. "This is a waste of time," he spat at Gladstone, who was conducting the interview. "I don't know why you have me down here." Gladstone explained the situation calmly, leaning forward. "We found Mr. Calhoun, Joel. He's a victim of a homicide, shot with a .45, and we found a .45 holster and matching ammo in your bedroom." Joel's demeanor shifted, but only slightly. He offered a practiced answer, a deflection that smelled like a deliberate shield. "I haven't seen that gun in months. I reported it missing back in September." They checked the records. Joel Leninger was telling the truth. He had indeed reported a .45 caliber handgun stolen in September of 2016, months before Clark's disappearance. The skinny evidence, the empty holster, the ammo, the dramatic resistance, was not enough to charge Joel. He posted bail immediately for the obstruction charges and walked free. Elkins was back to square one, but with a new, dark permutation. The gun was Joel's, but it was reported stolen. Jeremy was the last person seen with Clark and had the strongest, though petty, motive. The murder weapon was now a ghost. The investigation remained cloaked in darkness. They needed someone to scream ouch again. They needed a break. Chapter 6. The Gravesite Conversation. Elkins returned to the file, scrutinizing the initial interviews, knowing the smallest anomalies were often the biggest truths. Randy's initial, flat-out denial of the tension between Clark and Jeremy, that was a major red flag. Why lie about something so small? Elkins summoned Randy for a re-interview, this time with a fresh urgency. He didn't ease into the conversation. He plunged the knife in immediately. "Randy, I know you lied to me. I need the truth now. This is a murder investigation." Randy, hunched in the interview chair, folded immediately, the weight of the lie finally breaking him. He confessed that he had lied because he was terrified of losing the tiny foothold he had on the ranch, his job, his meager life. He confirmed that the relationship between Jeremy and Clark was far from fine. Jeremy, Randy explained, absolutely hated Clark. He was fed up, Randy whispered, running a hand over his face. Jeremy felt like Clark was taking advantage of his uncle, living on the property for free, lazy, refusing to work. The theft of the $150, which Jeremy was wild about, had been the fuse. It wasn't just the money, it was the final, stinging insult. Clark had to go. This confirmed the deep, growing motive, but it still didn't provide the concrete evidence needed for an arrest. Elkins was ready to let Randy go, certain he had squeezed the last bit of juice from the source, when Randy offered an unexpected piece of fruit. The other night, a couple days before Clark went missing, Randy said, his eyes distant, fixed on a wall he couldn't see. I was with Jeremy and this other friend, Tyler Frazier. We were just hanging out. He took a shaky breath. Tyler was talking about the dead cows on the property, where they'd bury them. And then he got weird, man. He looked right at Jeremy and said, "You could probably bury a body out there too. Nobody would ever know." Elkins went utterly still. A conversation about burying a human body 2 days before a homicide. He felt the blood pump in his ears. You are punching in the dark, and someone just cried out he needed to find Tyler Frazier. Now, Tyler Frazier was located and brought in. He was young, nervous, and instantly denied the conversation. "That wasn't me, detective. I was with my girlfriend. Never left my place the day Clark went missing." Tyler shifted the blame back to Randy and Jeremy, insisting they were the ones comparing locations on a map of the ranch. A map that, according to him, had been pulled out to discuss the best places for deep concealment. Elkins listened carefully. Tyler was denying his part, but he was confirming the conversation's existence and adding a terrifying new detail: a map. After the interview, Elkins reviewed the footage. Tyler was a liar, but he was also terrified. But more importantly, Randy had lied again. Randy had tried to pin the sinister conversation on an innocent third party, Tyler, when he was clearly the one who had heard it directly from Jeremy. Lying is always a bad thing, but persistent, calculated lying in a murder investigation meant only one thing: complicity. Randy was hiding something darker than an argument about a lazy tenant. Elkins prepared to issue a formal summons for Randy when the man, consumed by guilt and fear, walked directly into the sheriff's office. "I'm a little surprised you wanted to see me, Randy," Elkins said, not giving away his hand. Randy stood in the doorway, pale and shaking. "I got something I gotta get off my chest." Ooh. Elkins liked that sound. That was the sound of the dam breaking. Randy confessed everything. The deeper hatred, the mounting rage from Jeremy. But that wasn't what had him there. What Randy finally confessed was the reason for his multiple frantic lies. He had been complicit in the cover-up. He knew more than he had let on, and he had been trying to build a fortress of secrecy around the one person he still called a friend, Jeremy Leninger. But even Randy's confession, while powerful regarding motive and relationship, was circumstantial. They had no weapon, no physical evidence connecting Jeremy to the river. Jeremy, now aware that his secrets were dissolving in the small, tight-knit community, declined any further statements. He was running, not physically, but spiritually, withdrawing into a stone wall of silence. Elkins needed concrete proof, something outside the word of terrified witnesses and petty grudges. He needed Big Brother. Chapter 7. The Ping and the Co-Conspirator. Elkins got a warrant for Jeremy Leninger's cell phone records. In the world of modern homicide investigation, the phone is a digital rope tethering a criminal to the scene of their crime. Your phone is never off, Elkins often thought, and if you keep it on you, we will find you. The analysis of the call data and, more crucially, the cell tower pings was a revelation. Jeremy's phone movements mirrored the key locations of the crime with a horrifying precision. On the night of December 28th, Jeremy's phone did not stay near the ranch. It tracked south. It moved between the ranch, the scene of the abduction and likely murder, and a specific, repeated point down toward the river in Cowlitz County, 2 counties away. More importantly, the phone data showed that Jeremy hadn't acted alone. The pings showed Jeremy's phone stopped for approximately 20 minutes at a specific location before both phones, Jeremy's and a new, co-traveling device, traveled together, southbound on the dark back roads, mirroring each other until they reached the vicinity of the river where Clark's body was later found. The second phone belonged to John Perry. John Perry was the co-conspirator. At minimum, the helper. He was the final piece of the puzzle, the one who was there, who could turn circumstantial evidence into damning testimony. Elkins had spent weeks in darkness, and now the light was shining directly onto the two men responsible for dragging Clark Calhoun's body through the mud. Elkins located John Perry at an apartment complex in Longview, Washington. Perry was arrested immediately as a co-conspirator of a homicide, a charge that carried significant jail time. He was booked into the Thurston County Jail on a $250,000 bail. Perry was a young man, only 20, facing a lifetime behind bars for what he swore was a simple request for a ride. He was terrified, out of his depth, and suddenly dealing with the terrible, heavy time of someone else's murder. In the sterile cold of the interrogation room, John Perry sat across from Detective Elkins, his face pale and eyes red-rimmed. "I know I don't want to be a part of this," Perry stammered. "I wasn't a part of this. I didn't have no choice in this." "I understand," Elkins said, his voice calm, encouraging. "You're not dealing with someone else's time. You're dealing with your own time. Now, tell me what happened, John. Start from the beginning." John Perry nodded, swallowed hard, and finally, he gave Clark Calhoun his voice back. The story was small, petty, and horrifying. Jeremy, convinced that Clark had stolen the $150, had reached his breaking point. He had decided he was done with Clark, not just as a tenant, but as a person. He needed the means to make him disappear. He had quietly taken his father's .45 automatic, the one reported stolen in September, the perfect alibi already established. Jeremy's motive was the ultimate banality of evil, entitlement and a few missing bills. On the night of December 28th, Jeremy, full of self-righteous rage, had approached Clark with the perfect, disarming trap. "Hey Clark, hole in the fence on the northeast side. Need a hand." Clark, unsuspecting, walked directly into his death trap. After the fence work, Jeremy offered the final lure. "Want to come smoke some weed with my buddy John and I real quick?" "Yeah, I'm always down for that," Clark had said. His last words, an agreement to a friendly invitation. Perry continued the confession, detailing the sequence with the flat, emotionless tone of someone reliving a nightmare. Jeremy had texted him, telling him to be ready. Perry, thinking they were going to drive out and beat someone's ass to get the money back, had jumped into the back seat of Jeremy's truck. Clark Calhoun, oblivious, was already in the passenger seat. "They didn't really talk at all," Perry told Elkins, shaking his head. "Jeremy just seemed agitated, pissed off." Jeremy drove for a short while, not to any fence line or bunkhouse, but to a remote, empty section of the ranch. He stopped the truck. "Everyone get out," Jeremy had commanded. Clark, confused, stepped out. Perry jumped out. Then Jeremy had sent Perry back into the truck with a quick, nervous order. "Go grab the weed." It was the final distraction. Perry was leaning over the seat, his hands fumbling in the dark for a bag of marijuana that may or may not have existed, when the silence of the mountain was torn apart. Then all of a sudden, I heard 4 gunshots. Perry scrambled out, his mind reeling, expecting to see a bear or a coyote. Instead, he saw Clark Calhoun on the cold ground, his life draining into the mud, and Jeremy Leninger standing over him, holding his father's .45 automatic. I looked at Jeremy. He had a fucking crazy look on his face. Perry refused to help. He wouldn't touch the body. But Jeremy, calm and methodical now that the deed was done, was prepared. He grabbed a broken tarp from the back of the truck, tied Clark's legs, and used the farm's backhoe, a machine designed for heavy earthwork, to lift Clark Calhoun's body into the bed of the truck like a sack of garbage. Perry, paralyzed by fear and complicity, drove with him. They drove south on I-5, far out of Thurston County, down to Cowlitz County and the remote Cowlitz River. At the riverbank, Jeremy rolled the body from the truck bed to the ground, hiked him over the side, and watched Clark Calhoun's silent, final journey begin. Jeremy Leninger believed no one would ever know, but John Perry knew. And now, Detective Elkins knew. The puzzle was complete. Jeremy Leninger, motivated by a $150 delusion and a corrosive sense of entitlement, had lured, executed, and dumped a man in the river, all with the unwitting help of a terrified co-conspirator. The evidence, Perry's confession, corroborated perfectly by the .45 caliber round, the cell phone pings that traced their journey, and the testimony of all the earlier, small lies, was overwhelming. The prosecutor agreed. Jeremy Leninger was arrested. He never cooperated with law enforcement. He was convicted of murder and received a sentence of 18 years in the Washington State Penitentiary. John Perry, for his role, pleaded guilty and received 12 months. Elkins left the Cowlitz County Jail that day and drove back toward the north. As he approached the county line, Mount Rainier rose again, massive and silent in the distance. Its beauty was still a lie. The mountain was just a beautiful backdrop for the simple, terrible acts of men. But for the family of Clark Calhoun, the man who had only wanted a second chance, the voice of justice, carried across 2 counties and through the confession of a broken 20-year-old, had finally cut through the mountain's whisper. He had stood in Calhoun's shoes because Calhoun couldn't anymore. He had become his voice. Part 2. The Confession's Weight. Chapter 8. The Daughter's Grief. The phone call arrived in the middle of a mundane Tuesday morning, shattering the fragile peace that had settled over the Calhoun family since the news of Clark's body being recovered. Megan Calhoun, Clark's daughter, had tried to insulate herself from the details of the investigation, clinging only to the certainty that her father's long, wandering journey was finally over. The body was found. She could grieve. She could start to process the bittersweet truth that their planned reunion, the one that offered a promise of healing and shared memory, would never come. Now, Detective Elkins was on the line, his voice a low, carefully modulated rumble. He wasn't calling to confirm logistics. He was calling to confirm evil. "We have an arrest, Megan. 2 arrests. We know what happened to your father." Megan sat down hard on the edge of her bed, the receiver pressed tight against her ear. She was prepared for a narrative of poor judgment, a fight gone wrong, or a fall. She was not prepared for the calculated, monstrous simplicity of the truth. Elkins laid out the facts like stones. The measly $150, Jeremy Leninger's corrosive entitlement, the lure of the fence post, the trap, the 4 gunshots. "He was murdered, Megan, for nothing," Elkins said. "It was planned." The word murder was a physical blow. Her father wasn't just gone. He had been taken with brutal, casual malice. Clark, the man she remembered as a kind, gentle teddy bear, the man she was just starting to love again after years of distance imposed by his own poor choices, had been extinguished over pocket change and a perceived slight. I don't want to know the details," she choked out, her voice ragged. But even as she said it, a furious, burning need for certainty, for vengeance, even ignited in her chest. Elkins, with years of experience navigating the raw edges of a victim's family, understood the contradiction. "I will only share what you need to know for the funeral and the legal process, Megan. But I want you to know this. Your father's killer is off the street. We have a confession. We have the phone data. We will hold him accountable." Holding him accountable. That was the phrase that landed like an anchor in her storm. Justice. It wasn't about Clark getting his life back. It was about ensuring that the sheer banality of his murder did not define his existence. Jeremy Leninger had decided Clark was disposable. Megan Calhoun would spend the next year of her life proving Jeremy Leninger was wrong. She had always felt a distant gratitude toward Detective Elkins for simply looking for her dad, for giving him visibility in the world as a missing person. Now, she felt a profound, searing bond with him. He had become, as he always did for those who were silenced, Clark's voice. Chapter 9. The Confession's Echo. John Perry, 20 years old and suddenly staring down a felony murder charge, sat in the Thurston County Jail, the fluorescent lights buzzing like a chorus of angry insects. His $250,000 bail was an insult, a mountain of debt his family couldn't even dream of climbing. He wasn't a killer, he was just a dumb kid who'd taken a ride and been in the wrong back seat at the wrong time. He played the memory of the truck bed on repeat in his mind, the memory that had made him break in the interrogation room. "Go grab the weed." He remembered leaning forward, his hands scrambling for a non-existent bag in the dark, and then the awful, wet thud of the gunshots. 4. Not 2, as the coroner found, but 4. Jeremy must have missed the first 2. Or maybe he just kept pulling the trigger until the rage was spent. Perry hadn't seen the act. He had heard the sound. He had smelled the cordite and the pine needles and the mud. And when he turned, Jeremy Leninger was standing there, the heavy .45 automatic gripped loosely in his hand, a look on his face that wasn't anger, but a frightening, blank release. "Help me pick this guy up, will you?" Jeremy had asked, his voice calm, conversational. That was the moment John Perry's life bifurcated. He could have chosen to run, to scream. Instead, paralyzed, he chose inaction. "I don't want no part of this." But Jeremy didn't need his consent. He was methodical. The backhoe, a piece of heavy equipment Clark himself had likely operated, became the mechanism of his final, grotesque humiliation. Jeremy returned with the machine, its powerful engine deafening in the dark, and manipulated the levers with the calm efficiency of a ranch kid. The bucket dipped, scooped, and lifted Clark Calhoun's inert, tarp-wrapped body like a heavy sack of feed, depositing him in the bed of the pickup truck. Perry, still sitting uselessly in the cab, was now utterly complicit, his silence a stamp of agreement. The drive was endless. Interstate 5 was a ribbon of blackness and light, carrying commuters, families, and cargo, and, in Jeremy's battered pickup, a murdered man. The phone pings, which Elkins later used as an invisible rope connecting them, were just a silent record of their desperate flight. When they reached the Cowlitz River, Perry had finally found a weak, pathetic moment of resistance. He hadn't helped Jeremy tie the knots on the tarp. He hadn't helped him lift the body off the truck. He watched as Jeremy wrestled the heavy bundle to the edge of the riverbank, the body tumbling over the embankment and splashing into the frigid current. "He'll just float away," Jeremy had muttered, the words already slurred by the dark and the cold. "Go to Mexico. Nobody will ever know." They drove back to Thurston County in silence. John Perry didn't just feel complicit, he felt contaminated. He was a witness who had allowed himself to be transformed into an accessory. The fact that the gun, the ultimate piece of evidence, was already part of a phantom stolen report, a ready-made alibi provided by Jeremy's own father, Joel only cemented the terrifying, cold-blooded premeditation of the act. In the interrogation room, the 12 months of prison time that Elkins's team and the prosecutor offered for his full, unvarnished testimony felt like the only lifeboat in his personal ocean of guilt. He had to give up Jeremy and the truth to save his life. It was a choice born not of courage, but of sheer, unadulterated fear. Chapter 10. The Weight of the Badge. Detective Ben Elkins sat in his office, the physical file for 16 to 6,893 open on his desk. It was no longer a mystery. It was a dossier of human failure. He had seen it all. Passion killings, drug-fueled rage, complex financial conspiracies. But this, the petty, entitled rage over a sum of money Jeremy might not have even lost, was a new, hollow kind of brutalism. A man died over $150. The phrase echoed the theme of Elkins's long career, the sheer lack of motivation often behind the most terrible acts. Jeremy didn't just kill Clark, he killed him to assert dominance, to enforce a distorted sense of property and respect that he felt Clark, the transient, the lowlife, had violated. Elkins ran a hand over the stubble on his chin. He was tired, not physically, but deeply. Cases like this, where the crime was so small and the consequence so total, drained a detective's belief in humanity. He had a meeting with the prosecutor, Amanda Vance, a sharp, unyielding woman known for her methodical presentation of facts. "The timeline is airtight, Ben," Amanda said, reviewing Perry's statement alongside the cell tower data. "The pings put both phones at the ranch at the time of the lure, and then the exact same travel path down Rose Valley to the Cowlitz River. Perry's statement is corroborated by the .45 caliber round and the lack of the weapon at Joel's house. The missing gun report is the icing on the conspiracy cake. The defense is going to hammer Perry as a compromised co-conspirator who took a deal," Elkins warned. "They'll argue the entire thing was Perry's idea and he pinned it on Jeremy to save his own skin." "That's why we need to show the Leninger dynamic," Amanda countered, pushing a strand of dark hair from her face. "The defense of stolen gun is Joel's. It suggests a premeditated cover story long before the murder even took place, or at least a quick-thinking effort to provide his son with an escape route. Joel's reaction to the search warrant? That was not the reaction of a man who just learned his missing gun was used. That was the reaction of a man protecting his territory and, more importantly, his lineage." Elkins nodded, The Lenningers were a unit of toxic entitlement, Jeremy the executioner, Joel the protector, both operating under the belief that they were above the rules governing the temporary residents on their land. We also need to consider Tina and Randy, Elkins added. They both lied initially. We have to be ready for the defense to imply some broader, darker conspiracy among the residents, muddying the water around Jeremy. We'll handle it. Tina and Randy lied out of fear of losing their tenancy. Perry lied to save his life. Jeremy lied because he thought he was untouchable, Amanda summarized, tapping the file. That's the narrative. The arrogant lie versus the terrified lie. We're ready to file first degree. Elkins knew his part was essentially over. He had stood in Clark Calhoun's shoes, followed the scent, and delivered the truth. Now, it was up to the courts. He took a moment to look at a small, laminated photograph on his desk, a portrait of a man with kind eyes and a fading smile. Clark Calhoun. You got your voice back, Clark, he thought. Now let's make them hear it. Chapter 11. The Lenninger Silence. Jeremy Lenninger was an island of silent, frozen rage in the Cowlitz County Jail. Unlike John Perry, who was a waterfall of nervous, terrified confession, Jeremy refused to speak a single word about the night of December 28th. He was represented by a high-priced defense attorney, secured, Elkins suspected, by the very father who had provided him with the initial stolen gun alibi. The attorney, Mr. Elias Thorne, was a smooth, well-dressed shark who specialized in planting seeds of reasonable doubt in cases of circumstantial evidence. My client asserts his Fifth Amendment rights, Detective, Thorne stated, his voice a polished drone, every time Elkins attempted to interview Jeremy. Any further contact must be through me. He had nothing to do with the tragic death of Mr. Calhoun, and we look forward to discrediting the statements of the admitted accomplice, Mr. Perry. Jeremy sat beside his counsel, his young face hardened into a mask of pure, unyielding defiance. His eyes, however, betrayed the frantic calculation beneath the surface. He wasn't arrogant anymore. He was scared, but he was holding on to his last, best defense: silence. His father, Joel, meanwhile, was conducting his own quiet campaign of destruction. Having paid bail and avoided further charges on the obstruction, he continued to operate the ranch, creating a pervasive atmosphere of fear that still hung over the remaining tenants, Tina and Randy. The ranch, once a place of second chances, was now an open tomb, controlled by the family of the killer. Joel's refusal to cooperate, his violent reaction during the search warrant, and the convenient, long-forgotten report of the stolen .45 handgun made Elkins certain that Joel was fully aware of the true purpose of his gun. Whether he knew what Jeremy intended or simply provided the alibi after the fact was immaterial to the first-degree charge, but vital to the full truth. Elkins tried one final move, a visit to Karen, Jeremy's mother. He found her alone in the main ranch house, the curtains drawn, the interior smelling of wood smoke and old despair. Karen was a ghost of the woman who had initially been shocked by Clark's murder. Now, she was resigned. He told me Clark moved to California, she repeated, her voice flat. He always handled things. He didn't want me to worry. Did Joel ever talk about the gun being used, Karen? Did he tell Jeremy to use the stolen report as an alibi? Karen merely shook her head, tears tracing clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. I don't know, Detective. I love my son. I love my husband. I just want this nightmare to end. The Lenningers were closing ranks, forming a silent fortress. The father, Joel, had provided the means and the shield. The son, Jeremy, was now hiding behind the iron door of the Fifth Amendment, betting that the terror of a low-life co-conspirator was not enough to overcome the shield of entitlement and the alibi of a stolen gun. But Elkins had more than terror. He had the physics of cell tower data, the unique caliber of the bullet, and the deep, motivating resentment that fueled the crime. The truth, Elkins knew, was like the river. No matter how desperate the attempt to sink it, it would eventually surface. Word count for Part 1 and 2, approx. 6,850 words. I have now provided a detailed continuation, focusing on the emotional and psychological fallout of the crime, the full weight of John Perry's confession, and the silent opposition of the Lenninger family. Please let me know when you are ready for me to continue with Part 3, which will cover the pretrial maneuvers and the beginning of the courtroom battle, bringing the novel closer to the 20,000-word goal. The Glacier's Shadow, Part I, The Vanishing. Chapter 1. The Mountain's Witness. The air tasted of pine and impending snow. It always did here, beneath the vast, crystalline dome of Mount Rainier. The mountain, locally just the mountain, was not a backdrop. It was a character, a silent, indifferent witness to the small, messy lives unfolding at its glacial feet. This particular stretch of Washington state, deep in Thurston County, was all rugged beauty and hard, isolated living. A place where you could spend the rest of your life watching the seasons turn and never see a cop. Detective Ben Elkins, major crimes for the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, felt the familiar ache in his lower back as he pulled his unmarked sedan off the main highway and onto a long, rutted gravel lane. The case number 16 to 6,893 was already a dry, bureaucratic anchor on what felt, even now, like a desperate, purely human cry for help. He was here because a woman named Tina Inman hadn't seen her boyfriend in 3 days. The gravel lane snaked past fields, grazed bare by draft horses, past a rotting silo that leaned like a drunk, and finally opened onto a modest, working ranch. It wasn't the kind of showpiece property that catered to Seattle's weekend crowd. This was dirt under the fingernails agriculture, a place of worn machinery and mended fences. A faded trailer, where the missing man, Clark Calhoun, was said to live, was parked near a muddy copse of alders. Standing outside, bundled against the December chill, was Tina Inman. She was a woman whose weathered face spoke of too much sun and too little sleep, but whose eyes were currently sharp with a mixture of fear and barely contained fury. "Detective Elkins?" she asked, her voice raspy. "That's me, ma'am. Thanks for calling us in. I'm following up on your missing persons report for Mr. Calhoun." Elkins stepped out of the car, adjusting his coat. He was a man built for comfort, not speed, with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen the worst things humans do and still chose to get out of bed every morning. Tina led him to the trailer, pointing to a small propane-fueled heater next to the door. "Clark, he just wouldn't do this. Not like this. He'd take his wallet for God's sake. Look." She pushed the trailer door open. Inside, the space was small but orderly. On a small, chipped formica table lay a worn leather wallet, a handful of coins scattered around it. "He even left his wallet," Tina repeated, her voice cracking now. "He uses my cell phone because he doesn't carry his own. The only thing missing, is his silver and turquoise ring. He never took that off." Elkins knew the indicators, the subtle signposts that turn a simple missing person case into something more sinister. Voluntary disappearance, wallet, keys, phone gone. Not the case here. Distress call. A note, a call, a fight before he left. Not reported. The uncharacteristic absence. This was the anchor holding his suspicion. A man who was finally trying to reconnect with his children, who had a tentative future on this ranch, does not just vanish 3 days before Christmas, leaving his entire identity behind. "Tell me everything again, Tina," Elkins said gently, pulling out his notebook. "Start with the last time you saw him, the day he went missing, December 28th. Tina wrapped her arms around herself, her gaze drifting toward the forest line, as if Clark might materialize from the shadows. "It was evening. Me, Clark, and Randy. Randy's a friend. He helps out sometimes. We were going to go into Olympia. Shopping trip, just to get out of the damp." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "That's when Jeremy came." "Jeremy?" "Jeremy Leninger, son of one of the ranch owners, Joel. This place was a family operation." Elkins wrote the name down, underlining it. "Jeremy drove up on a tractor. He stopped us right by the gate. He called out to Clark, said he needed help building some new fence lines before the big freeze hit." "Did Clark object?" "No. Clark's. He's trying to be helpful. He came here to get back on his feet, you know? My dad, he had some hard times, but the owners, Jeremy's dad, Joel, and Joel's brother, they were friends. They gave him space for the trailer, no charge. Clark wanted to earn his keep. So, Clark had willingly gone with Jeremy. That was the last confirmed sighting. Tina and Randy left for town. She returned late, hours later, and the trailer was empty. Clark never came home. Did Clark have any enemies, Tina? Anyone he was feuding with? Not really. But, Jeremy. It was just a few days ago. One of the owners, Jeremy's mother, she mentioned to me that Jeremy was complaining about $150 missing from his truck. He thought Clark took it. The first discordant note. A whisper of motivation. A seed of resentment. Elkins filed it away. $150. A small sum, but enough to breed serious bad blood in close quarters. Okay, Tina, here's my card. If you remember anything at all, even a look or a comment that seemed off, call me. Elkins knew that the distraught family member often held the key piece of information, buried under layers of emotion. Tina's fear was genuine, and crucially, she had given him a suspect, however minor. Jeremy Leninger, the last person to see the missing man alive, off on a remote part of a 200-acre property. The mountain, shrouded in cloud, seemed to lean closer, listening. Chapter 2. The Two-Step Lie. The Thurston County Sheriff's Office was functional, smelling faintly of old coffee and ozone from the copy machine. Detective Elkins was back at his desk, staring at the growing whiteboard. Calhoun, Clark. Age 48. Missing. 12/28. He couldn't rely on Tina Inman's account alone. Rule number 1 of any major investigation: you cannot rely on a single source. He needed confirmation, triangulation. First up, Randy, the friend in the car. Elkins found him at a feed store in the nearby town of Yelm. "Excuse me, Randy," Detective Elkins, Thurston County Sheriff's Office. "Got a minute to speak with me?" Randy was a burly man, younger than Clark, with a cautious, shifty look in his eyes. He confirmed Tina's story exactly. The three of them ready to go to town. Jeremy rolling up on the tractor, Jeremy needing Clark's help with the fences, the farewell. It all tracked. "Randy," Elkins asked, leaning in, "has there been any confrontation with anyone you're aware of? Any bad blood?" "Nah, man, everybody's fine out there. Clark's a good dude, keeps to himself mostly." "I understand that Jeremy thought Clark stole some money from him." Randy blinked, then offered a small, dismissive, "Nah, that's news to me. I haven't heard anything about that." The antennae went up. Randy had just lied. Not a big lie, maybe, but a lie nonetheless. Tina, the missing man's partner, had mentioned the theft accusation. Randy, the friend who lived on the property, denied any knowledge. Why? Was Randy covering for Jeremy? Was he simply afraid of getting involved in ranch politics? Or was Randy protecting the source of the accusation, the ranch owners, perhaps to keep his own place in the community secure? Elkins let the lie hang in the air for a moment, then backed off. He had two people in his growing web of witnesses, and both pointed to one inescapable node: Jeremy Leninger. Chapter 3. The Ghost of Mr. X. Jeremy Leninger was found where Elkins expected, tinkering with an old pickup truck on the sprawling property. He was lean, restless, and wore the easy resentment of a man who thought he worked harder than he should. "Jeremy Leninger?" "Detective Elkins. I need to ask you about Clark Calhoun." Elkins knew how to handle field interviews. Get them on your turf, not theirs. "Mind if we speak in the car? It's quieter. My office has 4 wheels and an engine, makes for a quick chat." Jeremy, surprisingly, was cooperative. He slid into the passenger seat of the unmarked sedan, the leather smelling faintly of stale air freshener. "The 28th of December. You were the last person to see Clark. Tell me about that evening." Jeremy recounted the scene calmly. He'd asked Clark for help with the fence line. Clark had agreed. They had worked for an hour or so, just as dusk was settling. "And then?" Elkins prompted, keeping his voice flat, professional. And then Clark says, "I've got to meet somebody out at the gate. Said a friend was coming to see him." Elkins paused, pen hovering over the paper. A friend. The first new piece of information that didn't come from Tina or Randy. Who was this friend? Didn't say. Just, "I'm going to go meet a friend down at the gate." That's it. Then he walked off that way, back towards the trailer. Jeremy had just introduced a ghost into the narrative. Mr. X. Someone had come to see the missing man. Was it a coincidence? A planned meeting gone wrong? Or was it a perfectly manufactured red herring, designed to shift the focus away from the last known person Clark was with? "Let's talk about the money," Elkins steered, watching Jeremy's face for the slightest flicker. "The money stolen from your truck. Did you talk to Clark about it?" Jeremy downplayed it, just as Randy had claimed not to know about it. It was no big deal, just a mix-up. Might have been me misplacing it. I don't think Clark took it. We were cool. No big deal." But Tina said Jeremy was complaining about it. Elkins had 2 lies, Randy's and Jeremy's, canceling each other out. Randy lied by omission, denying knowledge of the conflict. Jeremy lied by minimization, denying the conflict was important. It showed a pattern of deflection surrounding the missing man and the missing money. Jeremy concluded the interview by offering to help, saying he had nothing to hide. He was friendly, cooperative, maybe a little too eager. When Elkins drove away, he was back to square one, but with a new worry. The introduction of Mr. X was a distraction, he suspected, but a search was still required. If Clark had met someone, and that meeting turned violent, he might be lying in a ditch somewhere on the 200-acre ranch. Chapter 4. The Cold Trail. Elkins returned to the station and filed the initial report, tagging it with a high priority. Missing persons cases in December at the base of Rainier were critical. Easily, if Clark had fallen in the elements, he could have succumbed to hypothermia within hours. He organized a full search party. They spent several hours combing the property. Deputies walked the fence lines Jeremy had mentioned. They drove the ATVs down the swampy back trails. The owners, Joel and his brother, were contacted and cooperated, though Joel seemed less than pleased by the intrusion. The next day, Elkins called in the professionals, a specialized search dog organization. Tina Inman, pale and quiet, provided the dogs with a couple of Clark's worn shirts, heavy with his scent. A dog's sense of smell was 600 times more acute than a human's. They could pick up a ghost of a trace on the cold, damp air. They searched for another full day. The dogs cast wide, enthusiastic circles, their handlers calling out directions through the thick brush. "Anything?" Elkins asked the lead handler as the winter sun began to dip behind the mountain. The handler shook his head, his breath clouding in the freezing air. "Nothing. No track, no scent trail that leads off the property. It just ends. No body, no blood, no clothing, no sign of struggle. And no Clark Calhoun." The investigation had hit a wall. If they weren't found quickly, Elkins knew, it was often because they couldn't come home. He issued the person bulletin. A flyer with a picture of a man with kind eyes and a worn smile went up across Thurston County and beyond. Missing, Clark Calhoun. Clark's daughter, in another county, saw the flyer. "Putting up those flyers for my dad really made things a reality," she would later say. "It really made things sink in that something was terribly wrong. There is no way that he would have missed a chance to see me and his grandkids." Elkins felt the weight of that hope. He knew the likelihood of a happy ending decreased exponentially with every passing hour. Weeks passed. The mountain watched, silent. The snow fell, covering the ground in a layer of pristine white, burying the last traces of the vanished man. Chapter 5. The Gift of the River. The world, Elkins often thought, was connected by water. Rain fell on Rainier, fed the streams, carved out the rivers, and flowed to the sea, sometimes carrying secrets with it. It was weeks later. 2 environmental scientists were taking water samples not in Thurston County, but 2 counties away, down in Cowlitz County, where the Cowlitz River snaked toward the Columbia. They noticed a protrusion, half submerged in the bottom mudflow, caught against a snag. It was human. Detective Lorenzo Gladstone, a veteran of the Cowlitz County Sheriff's Office, received the call. He was an investigator of a different temperament than Elkins, more direct, less philosophical, a man who liked to find the bullet, not the motive. Gladstone arrived at the riverbank. Half buried in the silt was the body of a Caucasian male. It was dirty, waterlogged, and missing socks and shoes, the rough journey downstream having stripped the man of his outerwear. "Our first goal was to identify who this person was," Gladstone later recalled. He ran the man's description through the regional BOLO, Be on the Lookout list. Then he noticed the hand. The silt had been washed away enough to reveal a single piece of jewelry, silver, with a large, unmistakable piece of blue-green turquoise. Well, my. Gladstone immediately called Elkins in Thurston County. "Ben, I think you lost one of your people. Got a body down here in the Cowlitz. He's wearing a ring that matches your bolo for Clark Calhoun." Elkins's gut dropped. A sickening, familiar lurch. The missing man was missing no more. "How did he get 2 counties away?" Elkins asked, already calculating the drift, the currents, the time in the cold water. The logistics of the disposal were Gladstone's problem for now. The identification was Elkins's. Arrangements were made to transport the body to the Calais County Coroner's Office. Elkins and his team drove down the next day. At the morgue, the body was rough, Scrapes and scratches were visible from being hung up on rocks and dragged by the river's currents. "Drifting down the river, he's going to have some injuries," Elkins said to Gladstone, surveying the damage. "Looks like an accident. Maybe he was drunk, had a heart attack, fell in." Gladstone shook his head, motioning to the coroner. "Hold on to that thought, Ben. We cleaned off the silt with a hose. You want to see how he got into the river?" The coroner pointed to the chest. The skin was pale, but the entry wounds were unmistakable. 2 large caliber gunshot wounds. One below the ribcage, one near the shoulder. "That'll do it," Elkins muttered, the bureaucratic distance between him and the case dissolving entirely. This wasn't a death investigation. It was a homicide. A man had been taken from the base of the beautiful, indifferent mountain and dumped like garbage into a cold, indifferent river. Clark Calhoun was murdered. Chapter 6. The Signature Round. The autopsy proceeded swiftly. The first shot was likely fatal. The second, an insurance policy. Bodies were notoriously difficult to dispose of. In a panic, logic was the first casualty. Jeremy, or Mr. X, or whoever had done this, had clearly acted in a state of terror and chaos, hoping the river would carry the secret to the Pacific. "We found something," the doctor announced, holding up a small, bagged evidence container. Inside, nestled in cotton wool, was a mangled but recognizable projectile. "A bullet," Elkins confirmed. "A .45 caliber round," the doctor specified. "Large caliber. We'll need ballistics to confirm the twist pattern, but you're looking for a .45 associated with your suspect." Elkins felt a rush of professional adrenaline, cold and sharp. The caliber was a crucial piece of the puzzle. It was a physical signature. In the darkness of a murder investigation, where every lead was a punch, this was the first time someone had said, "Ouch." They now knew the type of weapon used. The case changed its personality entirely. It was no longer a vague missing person search emanating from a remote ranch. It was a targeted homicide, anchored by a unique piece of evidence, pointing back to a very specific type of firearm. Elkins left the morgue that evening with the smell of formaldehyde in his coat and a single goal: find the .45. And everyone back at the ranch, especially Jeremy Leninger, had just moved from a person of interest to a potential killer. First, though, was the hardest part: calling the daughter and ending her hope. The mountain was silent, but now the truth was screaming. Part 2. The Pressure Cooker. Chapter 7. The Unwilling Witness. Elkins sat in his car outside the station, the phone heavy in his hand. He had the prosecutor's preliminary authorization for a search warrant, contingent on gathering more specific probable cause linking the .45 caliber bullet to a person or place. But first, he had to make the call. Clark Calhoun's daughter, who had put up the hopeful flyers, was on the other end. He kept the message concise, professional, and brutally honest. Her father was found. He was not alive. It was a homicide. The silence that followed was a physical presence, heavier than the rain now pattering on the roof of the sedan. I always hoped," she finally whispered, the grief a raw, jagged sound. "But it brings peace, knowing he's home, knowing we'll get answers." That was the job, Elkins thought, hanging up. Not just catching the killer, but creating the space for peace. He had to be Clark's voice, because Clark couldn't speak anymore. And that voice was demanding justice from the people who had last seen him alive, and the people who lied about it. The entire investigation now revolved around a tiny, grubby piece of metal, a .45 caliber round. He spread out the ranch map on the passenger seat, circling Jeremy Leninger's home, a separate structure on the larger property owned by his father, Joel. The location was critical, close to where Clark was last seen, and now, potentially, the source of the murder weapon. Joel Leninger, the co-owner of the ranch, had been briefly cooperative during the initial search, but his son, Jeremy, remained the primary person of interest. "Jeremy is the last person seen with Clark," Elkins stated to his partner, Detective Ray Perez, back at the office. "He has motive the $150 theft accusation, and he fabricated the Mr. X story to throw us off. We go to the source of the gun. That means the Leninger residence." Perez, a younger detective with a sharp mind for forensics, nodded. "If Jeremy didn't own the .45, who did? And where did he get it? We're looking at 2 possibilities. Jeremy stole a .45 from his father, Joel, to commit the murder. Or Joel himself is involved, and Jeremy is covering for him, or just lying about the whole thing. The line between the father and the son was blurred by property lines and family loyalties. The fastest way to force clarity was to apply pressure. Chapter 8. The Warrant. Securing a search warrant for a private residence, especially one on a large rural property, was always a balancing act. Elkins worked closely with the prosecutor, detailing the convergence of the evidence. Clark was murdered by a large caliber weapon. The bullet recovered was a .45 caliber round. Jeremy Leninger was the last person to see Clark Calhoun alive. Jeremy Leninger had a documented financial dispute, the $150, with the victim, creating a basic motive. Jeremy Leninger had provided misleading information regarding the victim's disappearance, the Mr. X alibi. Jeremy lived on the property owned by his father, Joel, in close proximity to the location where Clark was last seen. The judge signed the warrant late on a cold Tuesday evening. The target, Joel Leninger's property, specifically Jeremy's separate dwelling, but extending to common areas and any storage structures on the premises where a large firearm might be kept or hidden. "We need to be surgical," Elkins instructed the team of deputies and detectives gathered for the briefing. "We are looking for a .45 caliber handgun, ammunition, or any cleaning storage equipment related to it. Jeremy is the primary target for suspicion, but keep your eyes open for Joel's involvement." The air in the briefing room was thick with expectation. The transition from a quiet missing persons case to an active homicide investigation always brought a rapid, intense burst of energy. They were no longer searching for hope, they were hunting a gun. Chapter 9. The Volatile Entry. The approach to the Leninger property was executed under the cold, pale light of dawn. 4 sheriff's vehicles, including a patrol car for backup, descended on the ranch, minimizing the chance of suspects fleeing. Elkins, along with 3 deputies, approached the main house, where Jeremy lived with his parents. Jeremy's own smaller cabin on the land was the primary focus, but they needed to secure the owners first. Jeremy was, thankfully, nowhere to be seen. A woman with a tight, confused expression, Karen Leninger, Jeremy's mother, Joel's wife, answered the door. "Mrs. Leninger, I'm Detective Elkins. We're with the Thurston County Sheriff's Office. We have a search warrant for the premises." Karen's eyes widened, her hands flying to her mouth. "A search? What? For what? What about Clark? My husband told me he moved to California months ago. He just packed up and left." Elkins felt a chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. California. Joel Leninger had actively misled his own wife about the whereabouts of a missing man who had been staying on their property. This was a lie of major scale, not a casual cover-up. "Mrs. Leninger, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Clark Calhoun is not in California. We found his body down by the Cowlitz River. He was the victim of a homicide." The news hit Karen like a physical blow. Her face went pale, her denial giving way to a sickening realization. The quiet desperation in her demeanor suggested she was now trying to reconcile her husband's explanation with the cold, uniformed reality standing on her porch. "We are searching for a handgun, ma'am. Please step aside and allow my deputies to enter." As the team moved inside, Elkins heard a frantic, muffled sound. Karen, gripping her cell phone, whispering urgently. "Joel, your buddies from Thurston County are here. They're looking for a gun." The warning shot had been fired. Chapter 10. The Rage of Joel. Minutes later, a beat-up Ford F-150 came skidding onto the gravel driveway. Joel Leninger, a powerfully built man with a shock of gray hair and a perpetual scowl, erupted from the driver's side, screaming, "What the hell is going on here? Get the hell off my property! You have no right!" His rage was primal, unfiltered. He stomped towards the house, chest out, seemingly ready to physically throw 4 armed law enforcement officers off his land. "Mr. Leninger, we have a lawfully issued search warrant signed by a judge. This is the order of the court. Please calm down, sir, and step away from the dwelling." Elkins held up the official paper, but Joel didn't even glance at it. "I don't give a damn about your warrant. You got no right to be here. Get your ass off my property." The escalating aggression was a severe threat pattern. A deputy moved to intercede. Joel shoved him violently. "Don't you touch me!" Joel roared. In a swift, practiced motion, 2 deputies moved in, grabbing Joel's wrists. The struggle was intense. Joel bucked and twisted, convinced his proprietary rights superseded the law. "You're under arrest, Mr. Leninger, for obstruction of justice and resisting arrest." It took 5 deputies to finally subdue the enraged rancher and cuff him. He was breathing heavily, his face mottled purple with fury and exertion, shouting profanity all the way to the patrol car. Elkins watched him go, a grim satisfaction settling in his gut. Why would somebody do that? Cooperation signaled innocence. This violent reaction signaled fear. What was Joel so terrified they would find in his home? Chapter 11. The Empty Holster. With Joel in custody, the house was secured, and the search intensified. Perez and the forensic unit focused on the bedrooms. They were in Joel and Karen's master bedroom, the primary residence, not Jeremy's cabin. One deputy pointed to a leather belt hanging in the closet. The belt had a heavy, custom-made leather holster attached. "Detective, check this out." The holster was empty. But nestled in the pouch nearby, a thin, oily cloth wrapping around it, was a spare magazine. Perez carefully opened the magazine. It was fully loaded with large, dull metal rounds. "Looks like 45 ammo, Ben," Perez murmured, holding up one of the cartridges. "Consistent with the caliber we pulled from Calhoun's chest." The evidence, though circumstantial, was a hammer blow, an empty holster, a matching magazine, and a homeowner who went berserk when police came searching for a gun. Elkins turned to Karen, who was sitting, rigid and pale, on the edge of the living room sofa, seemingly in shock. "Whose bedroom is this, Karen?" She swallowed hard, her eyes darting between the closet and the detective. It's Joel's. Mine and Joel's." Joel's, not Jeremy's. The empty holster, the .45 magazine, the murder of Clark Calhoun, and the volcanic rage of the homeowner who had lied about the victim moving to California. The flags weren't just raised, they were whipping violently in the wind. The suspicion had dramatically shifted. They had come for Jeremy, the resentful son. They might be leaving with the father, Joel Leninger, as the prime suspect. Chapter 12. The Skinny Evidence. Joel Leninger was detained at the Thurston County Sheriff's Office. He was calmer now, the adrenaline having ebbed, replaced by cold, legal calculation. Elkins and Gladstone entered the interrogation room. Gladstone was present because the body was found in his jurisdiction. Elkins was the lead on the homicide. "Mr. Leninger," Elkins began, setting the tone. "We found Clark Calhoun. He was shot twice with a .45 caliber handgun." Joel remained stone-faced. "I don't know anything about that." "The problem, Joel, is that we found an empty holster and a magazine loaded with .45 ammunition in your bedroom closet. That gun is missing, and the caliber matches the bullet we pulled from Clark Calhoun." Joel leaned back in his chair, a small, arrogant smile playing on his lips. "Ah, the gun. I haven't seen that gun in months. I reported it missing back in September." Elkins stared at him, suppressing the urge to slam his fist on the table. It was a perfect, calculated defense. They immediately pulled the records. Sure enough, in September 2016, Joel Leninger had filed a report with the local police. A .45 caliber handgun, stolen from his truck. It was what Elkins called skinny evidence, evidence too thin to hold a charge. They had found the perfect circumstantial clues, the caliber, the empty holster, the resistance, but Joel had already laid the defensive foundation months ago. He had a documented alibi for the gun's absence. "You're loose, Joel," Elkins admitted, standing up. "But we're just getting started." Joel Leninger posted bail almost immediately for the obstruction and resisting arrest charges. As he walked out of the jail, he cast a triumphant, venomous look back at Elkins. He was a free man, but he was also now officially a person of extremely high interest. The case was darker now. It wasn't just Jeremy. It was the Leninger family, father and son, locked in a conspiracy of silence, armed with a pre-reported missing gun. Elkins was punching in the dark, and he needed someone to say, "Ouch," someone who would break the family's wall of lies. The focus had to shift back to the people who were easiest to crack, the young, the anxious, the ones with everything to lose. The mountain, veiled in a fresh layer of snow, watched the hunters regroup. Author's note to the user: I have successfully integrated the events surrounding the search warrant, the dramatic confrontation with Joel Leninger, and the unexpected discovery of the empty holster and the pre-reported missing gun. This expansion, covering Part 2, Chapters 7 to 12, introduces deeper conflict and broadens the suspect pool. propelling the narrative forward significantly. To continue working toward the 20,000-word goal, the next part will need to focus on re-interviewing Randy, now armed with the homicide confirmation and Joel's involvement. The introduction of Tyler Frazier and the crucial conversation about burying bodies. The eventual flip of Randy. The introduction and interrogation of John Perry, the co-conspirator. The full confession, detailing the events of the murder and disposal. I am ready to proceed with part 3 when you give the command.